Welcome back to the Murphree Network. Today, the channel brings to you 2 Heartland ghost stories for October. These 2 stories have been shared from folks like you and me. If you would like to share a story, please like and subscribe to this channel and email your story or your contact information to themurphreenetwork@gmail.com. Just let me know if you'd like to remain anonymous.
Now to the ghost stories from the Heartland.
No, I'm not going to read it in that voice. That's my Halloween witchy voice. You know, when I did radio for all those years, we used to do a little bit of voice acting on our advertisements, so that's kind of where that came from. But in the meantime, one of these stories is set in Lawrence, Kansas, and another is set in Chicago. These are real stories from real people, and these are their words. Enjoy! This first story comes from Bob and Jen. This lovely couple are generous, hardworking people who had several children of their own and adopted several more. Their house was always full of family and friends, and especially for the holidays, people of all shapes and sizes would find their way to their big home in the country. Jen was a great storyteller, and one evening as we were all swapping stories, she said, "I have a true, strange story to tell everyone." We all quieted down and waited to hear. Jen began, "Bob and I used to live in Chicago, and while our home was being painted, we agreed to house sit for a couple of friends of ours. We did not have any kids yet, so the time away was almost like a mini vacation. The apartment was very nice and sat on the second floor of the building. It had 2 bedrooms, 1.5 bathrooms, a lovely living room and dining area, and a nice kitchen. We thought it was a whole bunch better than a hotel. We settled in to stay the weekend. Friday night we just hung out together, watching shows and snuggling up, enjoying the time together. Saturday was cooking fun for me. I loved to try new recipes, and back then, Bob was the willing guinea pig. Luckily, my mom had taught me her great cooking tips, so Bob rarely suffered. Later that afternoon, we went out for a walk around the neighborhood. Everything was quiet and peaceful. This was a nice area with parks and people and pets. After our walk, we returned to the second-floor apartment, and Bob settled in on the computer for a few, and I pulled out a good book to read. That evening, we ate together in comfortable quiet and settled in on the couch for a movie. That's when the ruckus upstairs started. Sounded like a big party. Lots of dancing and loud voices. It was Saturday night in Chicago, after all. We weren't upset by the noise, though. We were young, too, and so we just rolled our eyes at some of the louder pounding on the ceiling and endured the noisy din. We finished the movie and went to bed. Both of us were heavy sleepers back then, so the noise from the upstairs apartment didn't bother us much. The next day was Sunday, and our friends returned home. We all had a Sunday brunch together before Bob and I packed up to head for home. Our house was ready, and we could tell that our friends were tuckered out. Just before we left, I said to them, "Hey, your neighbors upstairs had quite a party last night. I bet they'll be quiet tonight after all that dancing and wild romping around. It didn't bother us, though, and you're probably used to it. Next time, though, we might want to invite ourselves up. It sounded like a great time." As my friend listened, I saw the most curious look develop on her face as I spoke. So I stopped talking, and she looked at me with this puzzled expression, and I will never forget this, never forget what she said. "Jen," she said, "there is no apartment upstairs. We are the top apartment." She paused and went on, "There is only a roof, and no one but the maintenance guy has access." I looked at Bob. Bless his heart, he kept a calm face. And I looked back at my friend and said, "We heard the party. We heard it all night long. Dancing on the ceiling, loud conversations, we heard them." My friend just shook her head and repeated, "There is no living space above this apartment and no place to have a party." I didn't know what to say, didn't know what to think. We said our goodbyes, and Bob and I left for home. We never went back over there, and our friends moved from the apartment not long after. I never did find out any explanation. I don't think there is one. Thank you, Jen, for sharing your story. Someone was having a great time, but probably not a party I want to attend. Our next story comes from Kent. Kent is a tremendously talented musician who was also a club manager once upon a time in the 1970s in Lawrence, Kansas. He and his male roommate, we'll call him Cal, rented the basement living space in an older home in the 1400 block of Tennessee Street. The upstairs was rented by several gals who were friends, and everyone was attending Kansas University. There was a piano on the first floor in the girls' space that Kent would use for songwriting and practice from time to time. Just inside the entrance to the house was a small foyer with stairs to the second floor immediately in front, and a nice living room with the piano to the left. The kitchen was at the back of the first floor. You had to go through the living room to get to it. The back door was at the back of the kitchen that led into a small anteroom and then outside. The basement stairs were just off the living room under the staircase that led to the second floor. In the foyer, just before the staircase to go up, there was an antique mirror on the wall. The mirror was not quite full length, but long enough to check your outfit before going out. During the year that they all lived in the house, from time to time the girls upstairs would holler down to Kent and say, "Hey Kent, have you been here playing the piano today?" They'd heard the piano music coming from the first floor. Kent would respond that no, he'd been working at the club office all day, or no, he'd been out elsewhere, every time they asked. This happened several times, and the girls just thought he was playing a prank on them. But Kent insisted that that was not the case. A few months into this living arrangement, one of the girls, Sue, was taking a bath. She was relaxing one afternoon in a hot, steamy tub, when all of a sudden, a bath towel hurled itself from the rack across the room straight at her head. She jumped up out of the tub, grabbed her old robe, and dashed down the stairs all the way to the basement. Kent said she grabbed his arm and told him what had happened. He said that she was shaking and very upset, so he knew this really happened to her. He and Cal went upstairs but found nothing amiss except the towel in the water in the tub. Being a rational kind of guy, Kent decided to do some research on the history of the house, and he found some very interesting information. The home had once been owned by a man and his wife in the late 1800s and early 1900s. There had been a financial loss, and the man had died in the home. When I spoke to Kent, he couldn't remember the details of the financial loss or what had happened to the woman. He said that he just remembered, and this is some 40-odd years ago, that the guy had had financial troubles and he had died in the house shortly thereafter. Kent shared the information with his roommates, and he said the history gave everyone pause. It certainly made them wonder if there was a connection between the man's death and the crazy, unusual things that were happening in the house. On top of the towel and the sound of the piano playing at odd times, doors would open or slam shut, and the activity wasn't slowing down. So everyone had started looking for another place to live, even though they couldn't move right away due to the lease agreement. A few weeks later, another friend named Paula came to visit Lawrence and stayed with Kent, Cal, Sue, and the gang at the house. They planned an outing Saturday evening to Kent's club. Just before they headed out for the night, they took a moment to get photos. These days, I guess you would call them selfies, but back then in the 1970s, they were Polaroids. Great stuff for immediate photo gratification. Nothing unusual on the photos that evening, just great shots of great friends. About a month later, Kent was placing the photos in a memory album when he noticed something odd. In the photo of Paula, she had been photographed standing in front of the mirror near the front door. Kent saw in the reflection of the mirror, standing just behind Paula, the image of a man. He had a beard and glasses, and he was dressed in turn-of-the-century garb. Kent said the image was absolutely clear and had not been there just after the photo developed because they had all revisited those photos when they returned from the club weeks ago. Kent told me that he had kept that photo for many years, and he said of all the memorabilia that he has saved from his long career in the music business, losing that photo is one of his biggest regrets. He said it wasn't long after that all the roommates found other places to live, and no real harm ever came to anyone. but the memory remains. And that's our first installment of Ghost Stories for this Halloween. Thank you so much, Kent, for sharing your story. I hope you all enjoyed these true ghost stories from the Heartland. More to come, so please like and subscribe to the Murphree Network. And again, if you have a story you want to share, email the Murphree Network, all 3 words together, at gmail.com.
Until the next scary installment.
Take good care of yourselves and each other.